Hi everyone, I hope you really liked our video on frequently asked questions. We are here with a part 2 of the same. Alfonso is here again with me today. We have listed out more questions that we got from our candidates over the past week. I hope this video would really benefit you in your preparations. If you haven't watched our previous video, please make sure that you watch it before you watch this one. A link will be provided in the description box below.
Hi Abhishek. So the first question is, how should I address the examiner?
When it comes to the IELTS speaking test, you are not interacting that much with the examiner apart from the actual speaking test. If you have any questions to the examiner, you can directly ask the question. It's not a good idea to address the examiner as sir or ma'am. Also, it's not a good idea to call the examiner by his or her name, right? So in those instances, if you have a question to the examiner, you can directly ask the question in a polite way. For example, instead of asking, can you repeat the question, ma'am? Or can you repeat the question, sir? You can always ask, could you please repeat the question? Right? That conveys your intention, and then the examiner would repeat the question for you. So there is no need to address an examiner in a specific way. You can ask the question directly as it is.
All right. Is posture important? Should I maintain eye contact?
Right, that's a very good question. It's up to the candidate whether to show any gestures or postures or to maintain the eye contact with the examiner. Of course, postures and gestures are not a part of the actual evaluation criteria. It would be advisable if you can sit up with hands on the table and show some gestures or postures, because it is important when it comes to conveying an idea effectively to the examiner. Remember, in part 1 and part 3, it is better to look straight at the eyes of the examiner, because it would definitely help to convince the examiner. It would show the examiner that you are a confident candidate, right? But in part 2, as I have already mentioned in several videos in the past, it's better if you could look at the answers that you've noted down occasionally so that you don't go off topic when speaking a cue card. That's quite all right, because in part 2, the examiner doesn't expect you to speak continuously looking at their face like a machine for 2 minutes, right? So it's not a part of the actual evaluation criteria. I repeat, it's not a part. It would be better if you could show some postures and gestures.
Next question. I think this one will be related to part 3. The question is, what if I don't know an answer?
As we have mentioned in our previous video, for the IELTS speaking test, the candidate is required to speak in lengths. So you cannot straight away tell the examiner, I don't know the answer. Instead, you should try to frame it in a way that you speak in lengths. For example, if the question is about space exploration, many students may not have an idea about it, right? So if I get a question like that, I could always tell the examiner that I don't have much of an idea about this, but in my point of view, to an extent, I believe that space exploration is a good thing. And then if you have additional points, you can add in, right? So you've already told the examiner that you don't have an idea about this particular question. And then if possible, please try to add in additional sentences. As I said, speaking in lengths is very important for the speaking test.
Okay, so next question. How can I speak for 2 minutes in part 2?
Right. In part 2, that is the cue card section, many candidates face this problem. It's very important for you to stay focused on the main question. Sub-questions should only be used as guide points when you state an answer. The main question, I repeat, the main question is the most important part when it comes to the cue card section. You should focus on the main question and determine the main body of the cue card, which should be 6 or 7 strong sentences related to the topic. Before that, you can add an introduction and then a conclusion if you have further time left. We'll do a detailed video on how to state an introduction for the cue card in the near future, so stay tuned for that, right? So please make sure that your focus is on the main question and the keywords in the main question when you state an answer. It's not a good idea if you keep on expanding on each and every sub-questions in detail. That is a wrong thing to do. Your focus should definitely be on the main question.
Main question. Okay. So the next question, is it fine if I memorize a cue card?
No, it's not. As we have again mentioned in our previous video, it's not at all a bright idea to memorize an answer. Of course, you can find answers to certain recently asked cue cards online or from other sources. It's not at all a good idea to memorize an answer. Of course, you should think, your brain should work. It's always a good idea if you can practice certain cue cards so that when you sit right in front of the examiner, you can definitely perform well. But when you practice, make sure that you don't by heart an answer. This is not really the case in part 2 alone, but in part 1 and part 3 too. If you state a memorized answer, the examiner can easily understand from the tone of your speech. Right? As I said before, in part 2, you can definitely look at the questions and the sub-questions again, as this will be with you. It's not at all a good idea if you state a memorized answer.
So you're saying that there will be difference in the pace that they speak?
Yes. If I memorize an answer, it's quite natural that I use a monotone when I speak without any ups and downs.
So when it comes to part 3, then again they'll understand when we are taking long pauses, they'll understand that part 2 is memorized and part 3 that they're not going to.
Yes, from other sections they can
Yes.
definitely analyze and understand your level of speaking, right? So when you state a memorized answer, this can definitely affect your score.
Okay. Next one, can I state a contradicting answer?
This is again one of the most common questions that we get from our students. It's not at all accepted if you state contradicting answers. For example, in part 1, if I stated that I'm from a village, and again in part 1 or part 3, somewhere I mentioned I'm from a city, it would be counted as a contradicting answer. Similar is the case when it comes to part 3. Some examiners may ask you counter questions to test your level of language, to challenge you a bit, right? In those cases too, it's always important for you to stick on with your opinion. For example, if the question is like this, what's your opinion on admitting grandparents in old age home? If I have stated my opinion right, like no, it's not a good idea, and I stated sufficient reasons for my answer, the examiner may ask a counter question like this. Don't you think that old age homes these days provide a lot of facilities, so won't it be better if we admit them in old age homes? Which is a clear counter question, right? For such kind of a question too, I should stick on with my initial point of view rather than inclining onto the examiner's point of view. This is very important. Please bear in mind, you should never state answers in a contradicting way, as this can affect your band score.
Okay, so next question, which part is more important for the speaking test?
Remember, there is nothing like a more important or a less important part for the speaking test. Your score is calculated based on your overall performance. The examiner assesses you based on the evaluation criteria, and your performance in each part of the speaking test is very important, whether be it in part 1, part 2 or part 3. However, some examiners tend to challenge you more in part 3, that is the two-way discussion part, just to test your level of language and to make you speak more. In those cases too, please don't worry about it. Try to state your answers confidently and make sure that you convince the examiner.
Okay, next question, is paraphrasing important? How can I master this?
Right. There is a simple technique that you can practice. When you are alone, try to practice speaking for yourself. There are a lot of questions available online in part 1 and part 3. You can take some sample questions and try to speak for yourself. When you do so, try to think of synonyms. For example, if the question is, do you like flowers? Instead of like, I could use the word fond of. I can say, yes, I'm fond of flowers. Right? Similarly, think of words that you're familiar with. If you practice a lot, you can definitely master the skill.
Okay, so what you're saying is that it's not about learning difficult words or memorized words and using it while we speak, rather than using simple words and paraphrasing it, like what you said now.
Yes, that's right. Always remember to use words that you are familiar with, that you have tried and used in sentences before. You cannot simply mug up certain words and then use it all over your speaking test. That's not the way to do. You should when you learn a new word, you should practice it by adding it in sentences, use it quite often, and familiarize yourself with the word before you use it for the actual test.
Or else there will be mistakes with the pronunciation and all.
Yes, you can make mistakes with pronunciation. Sometimes you can go wrong with coherence too, because sometimes the candidates may try to create a fake context to fit in a memorized word. Right? So this can definitely affect coherence too, and as you said, pronunciation, definitely yes.
Okay, so we have next question. How is speaking test being assessed?
Right. Speaking test is divided into 3 parts, and based on 4 evaluation criteria, it is being assessed by the examiner who is taking the interview. The first criteria is fluency and coherence, which is the natural way in which you speak. Fluency refers to the natural way in which you speak, taking short pauses in between. Of course, you cannot pause to think for a word. That would be counted as a hesitation. This also doesn't mean that you should speak really fast, because that again sounds like a memorized answer, and you should never try to go at a very increased pace. You should take necessary pauses in between in a way to convince the examiner. Coherence is the logical connection of sentences. You should connect your sentences properly without deviating from the ideas. So that is called coherence. The next criteria is grammatical range and accuracy, which deals with the type of sentences that you use for the test. It's always a good idea if you can try to come up with a variety in your sentence structure. Rather than using plain, simple sentences, try to come up with complex sentences. You can also show your flexibility in tenses by trying to incorporate a different tense in your answer.
So will it be wrong if I say, if they're asking anything related to the present tense and I'm mentioning something about that happened in the past, is it fine?
It is absolutely fine, but it's always a good thing that if you could try to answer to the question asked exactly in the same tense, and then if you want to elaborate your answer or if you want to give further clarifications, you can use a different tense. That's absolutely fine. For example, if it is a question like this, what do you dislike in your hometown? I can say, in my hometown, traffic congestion is really high. In the future, I believe that the local authorities would take necessary steps to solve this problem. So I stated the answer in present tense, but I gave an explanation to this answer in future tense. That's absolutely fine. It in fact is good to show your grammatical range.
Okay.
Third criteria is pronunciation. Pronunciation is a very important criteria when it comes to the speaking test. You should pronounce your words naturally. You should remember that you should never mispronounce a word. Accent-wise pronunciation difference is acceptable for the speaking test. For instance, in American English it is advertisement. In British English it is advertisement. Advertisement and advertisement both are accepted. But you should never mispronounce a word. For example, instead of heart, if you say hurt, that is a mispronunciation. So that's it with pronunciation. Again, intonation too is a part of pronunciation, whereas I've mentioned before, if you state memorized answers, this can definitely create a hit on your pronunciation, because intonation, which is the tone of your speech, is also a hidden criteria when it comes to pronunciation. Last criteria is lexical resource, which deals basically with topic-specific vocabulary. You should use a lot of different words to convey and express your ideas rather than sticking on with one specific word. Here, as I just explained in the previous question, you should try to use synonyms. A lot of synonyms would definitely help you to achieve a better band score.
Okay, so I have a question. What about faking the accent? I don't have an accent, I'm trying to fake it. Will the examiner be able to find out?
Yes, definitely. That would definitely create a negative impression in front of the examiner. You can speak in a natural way, the way you speak. There's no need for you to imitate a fake accent. The examiner can definitely catch you if you try to imitate a fake accent, because of course, if I'm faking something, I would somewhere in the conversation come back to my original style of speech. Right?
You'll be forgetting it some or the other.
Yes, that's true. So when it comes to the pronunciation, you should pronounce the words properly without causing any mistakes. So that's it with pronunciation. There's nothing to do with accent at all. You should speak in a natural way without mispronouncing words.
You also spoke about grammatical mistakes. What are some grammatical mistakes that candidates regularly make that you have seen?
Most candidates, when the question is in present tense, they knowingly or unknowingly use the word will. For example, if the question is like this, do you like to play cricket? If this is the question, I have heard a lot of students answering this question like this: whenever I have some free time, I will play cricket. That's wrong, because the question itself is in present tense. I simply used the answer in future tense, even though the context I used there is simple present tense. So please be very careful when it comes to a mistake that you make in tenses, because frequent mistakes in tenses can definitely reduce your score for grammatical range and accuracy.
All right. This is a question related to part 3. So if I don't know the answer for a particular question, can I just think about it and then give the answer? Is it fine?
Definitely you should start the answer all of a sudden as you listen to the question. Of course, there are certain tips and tricks that you can use to buy more time from the examiner. One way is to ask the examiner to repeat the question for you, right? In those instances, you get more time to think of the answer, right? Apart from that, you can definitely ask the examiner, or you can definitely begin with a phrase like this. Let me think about it for a moment. In my point of view, see, I took a momentary pause there to come up with my answer. You can definitely do that, it's absolutely fine, but please make sure that you are not hesitating a lot to start the answer. Try to use phrases like this. Again, please don't memorize such phrases, because again, from your tone, the examiner can easily catch if you memorize such kind of phrases.
Okay, next question. What IELTS score is required for work or studies?
Well, it depends. Of course, when you plan to take your IELTS test, there would be a specific reason. For example, if I plan to study at a specific university or a particular country, there would be certain set rules for international students when they apply for a foreign education. Candidates should be aware about the test that is required, and then approach a coaching center to take up necessary coaching. And you should also book your test date after knowing this criteria. This is very important. Again, when it comes to work, certain employees in the UK accept IELTS life skills. Some employers only accept UKVI IELTS. So it depends on the employer or the educational institute or the country as a whole, as on what test you should choose for your IELTS.
So candidate should have a clear idea before starting the coaching.
Yes, definitely. Before starting the preparation itself, the candidate should have a clear idea whether to take up IELTS Academic or IELTS General or UKVI, IELTS Life Skills, and so on. Right? So the candidate itself should have an idea.
So next question. Can my score be decreased during a remark? This is about re-evaluation.
Right. For the speaking test, when you apply for an inquiry on results, a senior examiner would definitely listen to the conversation, to the audio recording, and then would determine whether there is an improvement in your score. Whether be it speaking, writing, listening, or reading, definitely your score would not decrease, right? This would either remain unchanged, or there would be an increase in your score. If there is an improvement in your score, they would definitely reimburse the re-evaluation fee that they have collected, IDP has collected from the candidates. It is clearly mentioned in their Instagram page, in IDP's Instagram page, that your score will not be decreased.
I think it's a great relief for students.
Yes, it is.
Okay, next question. What if I state a wrong opinion in part 3? Is it fine?
First of all, you should bear in mind that there is nothing like a right opinion or a wrong opinion. When you are asked to state an opinion for a particular question, you can state your opinion freely. It is very important to broaden your horizons. You should try to throw away all your prejudices and state an opinion. All you need to bear in mind is the fact that you should have sufficient reasons to support your opinion. For example, if this is the question, do you think robots should replace human beings when it comes to customer service? If this is the question, this is a question in part 3. If this is the question, I can state yes, no, or it depends. right? There are three different ways in which I could state an answer to this question if I have sufficient reasons for my answer. For example, if I state an answer like, yes, in my opinion, it's quite a good idea to replace human beings with robots, I can substantiate it with reasons by explaining that human beings are prone to tiredness. They may not be able to work continuously for 10 or 15 hours, right? So that is a reason for my answer. If I state a no to the same question, I can come up with a different reason. For example, I can say robots do not have any sort of emotions. They may not be able to handle an irate customer, right? So it depends on the reason that you give, and there is nothing like a right opinion or a wrong opinion.
In case of computer-based speaking test, will the question be displayed on screen? This is for part 2.
Yes, it will be displayed. The candidate can definitely look at the question over and over again while stating the answer. This is absolutely fine. Even for pen and paper based test, when it is a face-to-face conversation with the examiner, the question will be printed and will be kept in front of the candidate. He or she can definitely look at these questions as they speak. It's absolutely fine. In fact, you should practice speaking by referring the question occasionally in order to make sure that you don't deviate from the actual question.
So you talked about computer-based IELTS speaking, right? Will they be providing headphones for the candidate?
Yes, they'll be. This is to make the candidate listen to the examiner's question more clearly, and at the same time the examiner would be able to listen to the candidate more clearly. Definitely this would be provided at the test center, and you are required to wear headphones for the speaking test.
So they'll be giving extra time to check if it's working, and somebody
Yes.
will be helping, assisting us?
Yes, for computer-based test, they would definitely assist you. Also, inside the speaking test room, they would keep a bell for you to ring in case something goes wrong.
That is very useful.
Yes.
Okay, so we have the last question. Why did my examiner ask question after cue card before moving to part 3?
Right. Some examiners, in fact, most of the examiners ask a follow-up question after the cue card is over before moving on to part 3. This is to bring the candidate back into the mood of a conversation. Part 2 is a monologue where it is the candidate that speaks most of the time. To make them come back into the mood of a conversation, the examiner may ask a question or two. These questions are called follow-up questions before beginning part 3 of the speaking test. Remember, these questions are pretty straightforward. They are not that complicated. You can answer these questions in 2 or 3 sentences, absolutely fine. There is no need for you to elaborate as you do in part 3. Listen to the instructions by the examiner. Before beginning part 3 of the speaking test, the examiner would state, let's move on to part 3. Right? The examiner would give clear instructions. You should listen to that. And these follow-up questions are quite common for the speaking test.
Because many candidates misunderstand it to be part 3 question and they start elaborating it.
Yes.
So this should be avoided.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Thank you so much for watching our video. We will be updating you with more content. If you like our video, please do like, share and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions, do comment it. So we will be making more videos regarding it. Thank you.